Bostel slept that night, but his sleep was troubled, and a strange, dreadful roar seemed to run through it like a mournful wind over a dark desert. He was awakened early by a voice at his window. He listened. There came a rap on the wood. "Bostel! Bostel!" It was Holly's voice. Bostel rolled off the bed. He had slept without removing any apparel except his boots.
"Well, Hawk, what do you mean waking a man at this unholy hour?" growled Bostel.
Holly's face appeared above the rude sill. It was pale and grave, with the hawk eyes like glass.
"It ain't so awful early," he said. "Listen, boss."
Bostel halted in the act of pulling on a boot. He looked at his man while he listened. The still air outside seemed to fill with low boom, like thunder at a distance. Bostel tried to look astounded.
"Hell, it's the Colorado. She's booming."
"Reckon it's hell all right. For Creech," replied Holly.
"Boss,
why didn't you fetch them hosses over?" Bostel's face darkened. He was a bad man to oppose, to question at times.
"Holly, you're sure powerful anxious about Creech. Are you his friend?" "Nah, I've little use for Creech," replied Holly. "And you know that. But I hold for his hosses as I would any man's." "Uh-huh. And what's your kick?"
"Nothin'. Except you could have fetched them over before the flood come down. That's all." The old horse trader and his right-hand rider looked at each other for a moment in silence. They understood each other. Then Bostel returned to the task of pulling on wet boots, and Holly went away. Bostel opened his door and stepped outside. The eastern ramparts of the desert were bright red with the rising sun. With the night behind him and the morning cool and bright and beautiful, Bostel did not suffer a pang nor feel a regret. He walked around under the cottonwoods where the mockingbirds were singing. The shrill, screeching bray of a burro split the morning stillness, and with that the sounds of the awakening village drowned that sullen, dreadful boom of the river. Bostel went in to breakfast. He encountered Lucy in the kitchen, and he did not avoid her. He could tell from her smiling greeting that he seemed to her his old self again. Lucy wore an apron, and she had her sleeves rolled up, showing round, strong, brown arms. Somehow to Bostel she seemed different. She had been pretty, but now she was more than that. She was radiant. Her blue eyes danced. She looked excited. She had been telling her aunt something, and that worthy woman appeared at once shocked and delighted. But Bostel's entrance had caused a mysterious break in everything that had been going on, except the preparation of the morning meal.
"Now I rode in on some confab or other, that's sure," said Bostel good-naturedly.
"You sure did, Dad," replied Lucy with a bright smile.
"Well, let me sit in the game," he rejoined.
"Dad, you can't even ante," said Lucy.
"Jane, what's this kid up to?" asked Bostel, turning to his sister.
"The good Lord only knows,"
replied Aunt Jane with a sigh. "Kid? See here, Dad, I'm 18 long ago. I'm grown up. I can do as I please, go where I like, and anything. Why, Dad, I could get married."
"Ha!" laughed Bostel. "Jane, hear the girl."
"I hear her, Bostel," sighed Aunt Jane.
"Well, Lucy, I'd just like to see you fetch some fool, lovesick rider around when I'm feeling good," said Bostel.
Lucy laughed, but there was a roguish, daring flash in her eyes. "Dad, you do seem to have all the young fellows scared. Some day maybe one will ride along, a rider like you used to be, that nobody could bluff, and he can have me."
"Uh-huh. Lucy, are you in fun?"
Lucy tossed her bright head but did not answer.
"Jane, what's got into her?"
asked Bostel, appealing to his sister.
"Bostel, she's in fun, of course,"
declared Aunt Jane. "Still at that, there's some sense in what she says. Come to your breakfast now." Bostel took his seat at the table, glad that he could once more be amiable with his womenfolk.
"Lucy, tomorrow'll be the biggest day Bostel's Ford ever seen," he said.
"It sure will be, Dad. The biggest, surprising day the Ford ever had," replied Lucy.
"Surprising?"
"Yes, Dad."
"Who's going to get surprised?"
"Everybody." Bostel said to himself that he had been used to Lucy's banter, but during his moody spell of days past he had forgotten how to take her, or else she was different.
"Bracton tells me you've entered a hoss against the field."
"It's an open race, isn't it?"
"Open as the desert, Lucy," he replied. "What's this hoss Wildfire you've entered?"
"Wouldn't you like to know?" taunted Lucy.
"If he's as good as his name, you might be in at the finish. But, Lucy, my dear, talking good sense now. You ain't a-going to go up on some unbroken Mustang in this big race."
"Dad, I'm going to ride a horse."
"But, Lucy, ain't it a risk you'll be taking all for fun?"
"Fun? I'm in dead earnest." Bostel liked the look of her then. She had paled a little, her eyes blazed, she was intense. His question had brought out her earnestness, and straightway Bostel became thoughtful. If Lucy had been a boy, she would have been the greatest rider on the uplands, and even girl as she was, superbly mounted, she would have been dangerous in any race.
"Well, I ain't afraid of your handling of a hoss," he said soberly. "And as long as you're in earnest, I won't stop you. But, Lucy, no betting. I won't let you gamble."
"Not even with you?" she coaxed. Bostel stared at the girl. What had gotten into her?
"What'll you bet?" he queried with blunt curiosity.
"Dad, I'll go you $100 in gold that I finish. 1, 2, 3. Bostel threw back his head to laugh heartily. What a chip off the old block she was.
"Child, there's some fast hosses that'll be back of the king. It'd be throwing away money."
Blue fire shone in his daughter's eyes. She meant business all right, and Bostel thrilled with pride in her. "Dad, I'll bet you 200 even that I beat the king," she flashed.
"While of all the nerve!" ejaculated Bostel. "No, I won't take you up. Reckon I never before turned down an even bet. Understand, Lucy, riding in the race is enough for you."
"All right, Dad," replied Lucy obediently. At that juncture, Bostel suddenly shoved back his plate and turned his face to the open door.
"Don't I hear a running hoss?"
Aunt Jane stopped the noise she was making, and Lucy darted to the door. Then Bostel heard the sharp, rhythmic hoofbeats he recognized. They shortened to clatter and pound, then ceased somewhere out in front of the house. "It's the king with Van up," said Lucy from the door. "Dad, Van's jumped off. He's coming in. He's running. Something has happened. There are other horses coming. Riders? Indians?" Bostel knew what was coming and prepared himself. Rapid footsteps sounded without.
"Hello, Miss Lucy. Where's Bostel?"
A lean, supple rider appeared before the door. It was Van, greatly excited.
"Come in, boy," said Bostel. "What are you flustered about?"
Van strode in, spurs jangling, cap in hand. "Boss, there's a 60-foot raise in the river," Van panted. "Oh!" cried Lucy, wheeling toward her father.
"Well, Van, I reckon I know that," replied Bostel. "Maybe I'm getting old, but I can still hear. Listen."
Lucy tiptoed to the door and turned her head sideways and slowly bowed it till she stiffened. Outside were sounds of birds and horses and men, but when a lull came it quickly filled with a low, sullen boom. "Highest flood we ever seen," said Van.
"You've been down?"
queried Bostel sharply.
"Not to the river," replied Van. "I went as far as where the gulch opens on the bluff. There was a string of Navajos going down and some coming up. I stayed there watching the flood, and pretty soon Somers came up the trail with Blakesley and Bracken and some riders. And Somers hollered out, 'The boat's gone.'" "Gone?" exclaimed Bostel, his loud cry showing consternation.
"Oh, Dad! Oh, Van!" cried Lucy, with eyes wide and lips parted.
"Sure she's gone, and the whole place down there, where the willows was and the sandbar, it was deep under water."
"Oh, what will become of Creech's horses?" asked Lucy breathlessly.
"My God, ain't it a shame?" went on Bostel, and he could have laughed aloud at his hypocrisy. He felt Lucy's blue eyes riveted upon his face. "That's what we all was sayin'," went on Van, "while we was watching the awful flood and listening to the deep boom, boom, boom of rolling rocks. Someone seen Creech and 2 Paiutes leading the hosses up that trail where the slide was. We counted the hosses, 9, and we saw the roan shine blue in the sunlight." "Paiutes with Creech!" exclaimed Bostel, the deep gloom in his eyes lightening. "By, that's all lucky. Maybe them Indians can climb the hosses out of that hole and find water and grass enough." "Maybe," replied Van doubtfully. "Sure them Paiutes could if there's a chance. But there ain't any grass." "It won't take much grass traveling by night." "So lots of the boys say, but the Navajos, they shook their heads, and Farland and Holly, why, they just held up their hands." "With them Indians, Creech has a chance to get his hosses out," declared Bostel.
He was sure of his sincerity, but he was not certain that his sincerity was not the birth of a strange, sudden hope. And then he was able to meet the eyes of his daughter. That was his supreme test. "Oh, Dad, why? Why didn't you hurry Creech's horses over?" said Lucy, with tears falling. Something tight within Bostel's breast seemed to ease and lessen. "Why didn't I? Well, Lucy, I reckon I wasn't in no hurry to oblige Creech. I'm sorry now." "It won't be so terrible if he doesn't lose the horses," murmured Lucy.
"Where's young Joel Creech?" asked Bostel. "He stayed on this side last night," replied Van. "Fact is, Joel's the one who first knew the flood was on. Someone said he slept in the canyon last night. Anyway, he's raving crazy now, and if he doesn't do harm to someone or hisself, I'll miss my guess." "Humph!" grunted Bostel. "Right you are."
"Dad, can't anything be done to help Creech now?" appealed Lucy, going close to her father. Bostel put his arm around her and felt immeasurably relieved to have the golden head pressed close to his shoulder.
"Child, we can't fly across the river. Now, don't you cry about Creech's hosses. They ain't starved yet. It's hard luck. But maybe it'll turn out so Creech'll lose only the race. And Lucy, it was a dead sure bet he'd have lost that anyway."
Bostel fondled his daughter a moment, the first time in many a day, and then he turned to his rider at the door.
"Van, how's the cane?" "Wild to run, Bostel, just plumb wild. There won't be any hoss with the ghost of a show tomorrow."
Lucy raised her drooping head. "Is that so, Van Sickle? Listen here. If you and Sage King don't get more wild running tomorrow than you ever had, I'll never ride again." With this retort, Lucy left the room. Van stared at the door and then at Bostel.
"What did I say, Bostel?" he asked plaintively. "I'm always riling her." "Cheer up, Van, you didn't say much. Lucy is fiery these days. And she's got a hoss somewhere, and she's going to ride him in the race. She offered to bet on him, against the king. It certainly beat me all hollow. Now see here, Van. I have a hunch there's a dark horse going to show up in this race, so don't underrate Lucy and her mount, whatever he is. She calls him Wildfire. Ever see him?" "I sure haven't. Fact is, I haven't seen Lucy for days. As for the hunt she gave, I'll say I was figuring Lucy for some real race. Bostel, she doesn't make a hoss run. He'll run just to please her. And Lucy's lighter'n a feather. Why, Bostel, if she happened to ride out there on Blue Roan or some other hoss as fast I'd just will."
Bostel uttered a laugh full of pride in his daughter.
"Well, she won't show up on Blue Roan," he replied with grim gruffness. "That sure is death. Come on out now. I want to look at the king."
Bostel went into the village. All day long he was so busy with 1,001 things referred to him, put on him, undertaken by him, that he had no time to think. Back in his mind, however, there was a burden of which he was vaguely conscious of all the time. He worked late into the night and slept late the next morning. Never in his life had Bostel been gloomy or retrospective on the day of a race. In the press of matters he had only a word for Lucy, but that earned a saucy, dauntless look. He was glad when he was able to join the procession of villagers, visitors, and Indians moving out toward the sage. The racecourse lay at the foot of the slope, and now the grey and purple sage was dotted with more horses and Indians, more moving things and colours, than Bostel had ever seen there before. It was a spectacle that stirred him. Many fires sent up blue columns of smoke from before the hastily built brush huts where the Indians cooked and ate. Blankets shone bright in the sun. Burros grazed and brayed. Horses whistled piercingly across the slope. Indians lolled before the huts or talked in groups, sitting and lounging on their ponies. Down in the valley, here and there, were Indians racing, and others were chasing the wiry mustangs. Beyond this gay and colorful spectacle stretched the valley, merging into the desert marked so strikingly and beautifully by the monuments. Bostel was among the last to ride down to the high bench that overlooked the home end of the racecourse. He calculated that there were 1,000 Indians and whites congregated at that point, which was the best vantage ground to see the finish of a race. And the occasion of his arrival, for all the gaiety, was one of dignity and importance. If Bostel revelled in anything, it was in an hour like this. His liberality made this event a great race day. The thoroughbreds were all there, blanketed in charge of watchful riders. In the centre of the brow of this long bench lay a huge flat rock, which had been Bostel's seat in the watching of many a race. Here were assembled his neighbours and visitors actively interested in the races, and also the important Indians of both tribes, all waiting for him. As Bostel dismounted, throwing the bridle to a rider, he saw a face that suddenly froze the thrilling delight of the moment. A tall, gaunt man with cavernous black eyes and huge, drooping black moustache fronted him and seemed waiting. Courts. Bostel had forgotten. Instinctively Bostel stood on guard. For years he had prepared himself for the moment when he would come face to face with this noted horse thief. "Bostel, how are you?" said Courts. He appeared pleasant and certainly grateful for being permitted to come there. From his left hand hung a belt containing 2 heavy guns. "Hello, Courts," replied Bostel, slowly unbending. Then he met the other's proffered hand. "I've bet heavy on the king," said Courts. For the moment there could have been no other way to Bostel's good graces, and this remark made the gruff old rider's hard face relax.
Well, I was hoping you'd back some other hoss so I could take your money, replied Bostel.
Courts held out the belt and guns to Bostel.
I want to enjoy this race, he said with a smile that somehow hinted of the years he had packed those guns day and night. Courts, I don't want to take your guns, replied Bostel bluntly. I've taken your word, and that's enough.
Thanks, Bostel. All the same, as I'm your guest, I won't pack 'em, returned Courts, and he hung the belt on the horn of Bostel's saddle.
Some of my men are with me. They were all right till they got outside of Bracton's whiskey, but now I won't answer for 'em. Well, you're square to say that, replied Bostel, and I'll run this race and answer for everybody.
Bostel recognized Hutchinson and Dick Sears, but the others of Court's gang he did not know. They were all a hard-looking lot. Hutchinson was a spare, stoop-shouldered, red-faced, squinty-eyed rider, branded all over with the marks of a bad man. And Dick Sears looked his notoriety. He was a little knot of muscle, short and bow-legged, rough in appearance as cactus. He wore a ragged slouch hat pulled low down. His face and stubbly beard were dust-colored, and his eyes seemed sullen and watchful. He made Bostel think of a dusty, scaly, hard desert rattlesnake. Bostel eyed this right-hand man of Courts, and certainly felt no fear of him, though Sears had the fame of a swift and deadly skill with a gun. Bostel felt that he was neither afraid nor loath to face Sears in gunplay, and he gazed at the little horse thief in a manner that no one could mistake. Sears was not drunk, neither was he wholly free from the unsteadiness caused by the bottle. Assuredly he had no fear of Bostel and eyed him insolently. Bostel turned away to the group of his riders and friends, and he asked for his daughter.
"Lucy's over there,"
said Farland, pointing to a merry crowd. Bostel waved a hand to her, and Lucy, evidently mistaking his action, came forward leading one of her ponies. She wore a grey blouse with a red scarf, and a skirt, overalls, and boots. She looked pale, but she was smiling, and there was a dark gleam of excitement in her blue eyes. She did not have on her sombrero. She wore her hair in a braid, and had a red band tight above her forehead. Bostel took her in all at a glance. She meant business, and she looked dangerous. Bostel knew once she slipped out of that skirt she could ride with any rider there. He saw that she had become the center toward which all eyes shifted. It pleased him. She was his, like her mother, and as beautiful and thoroughbred as any rider could wish his daughter.
"Lucy, where's your hoss?"
he asked curiously. "Never you mind, Dad. I'll be there at the finish," she replied.
"Red's your color today, then?" he questioned as he put a big hand on the bright-banded head. She nodded archly. "Lucy, I never thought you'd flaunt red in your old dad's face. Red, when the color of the king is like the sage out yonder. You've gone back on the king."
"No, Dad. I never was for Sage King, else I wouldn't wear red today."
"Child, you sure mean to run in this race? The big one?"
"Sure and certain."
"While the only bitter drop in my cup today will be seeing you get beat. But if you run second, I'll give you a present that'll make the purse look sick."
Even the Indian chiefs were smiling. Old Horse, the Navajo, beamed benignly upon this daughter of the friend of the Indians. Silver, his brother chieftain, nodded as if he understood Bostel's pride and regret. Some of the young riders showed their hearts in their eyes. Farland tried to look mysterious, to pretend he was in Lucy's confidence.
"Lucy, if you are really going to race, I'll withdraw my hoss so you can win," said Weatherby gallantly.
Bostel's sonorous laugh rolled down the slope.
"Miss Lucy, I sure hate to run a hoss against yours," said old Cal Blinn. Then Coulson, Styx, Birthwhite, the other principals, paid laughing compliments to the bright-haired girl. Bostel enjoyed this hugely until he caught the strange intensity of regard
and the cavernous eyes of Quartz. That gave him a shock. Quartz had long wanted this girl as much probably as he wanted Sage King. There were dark and terrible stories that stained the name of Quartz. Bostel regretted his impulse in granting the horse thief permission to attend the races. Sight of Lucy's fair, sweet face might inflame this Quartz, this Kentuckian who had boasted of his love of horses and women. Behind Quartz hung the little dust-colored Sears, like a coiled snake, ready to strike. Bostel felt stir in him a long, dormant fire, a stealing along his veins, a passion he hated.
"Lucy, you go back to the women till you're ready to come out on your hoss," he said. "And mind you, be careful today."
He gave her a meaning glance which she understood perfectly, he saw, and then he turned to start the day's sport. The Indian races run in 2s and 3s, and on up to a number that crowded the racecourse. The betting and yelling and running, the wild and plunging mustangs, the heat and dust and pounding of hooves, the excited betting, the surprises and defeats and victories, the trial and tests of principles, jealously keeping off to themselves in the sage, the endless moving, colorful procession, gaudy and swift and thrilling, all these Bostel loved tremendously. But they were as nothing to what they gradually worked up to, the climax, the great race. It was afternoon when all was ready for this race, and the sage was bright grey in the westering sun. Everybody was restless, waiting. The tense quiet of the riders seemed to settle upon the whole assemblage. Only the thoroughbreds were restless. They quivered and stamped and tossed their small fine heads. They knew what was going to happen. They wanted to run. Blacks, bays, and whites were the predominating colors, and the horses and mustangs were alike in those points of race and speed and spirit that proclaimed them thoroughbreds. Bostel himself took the covering off his favorite. Sage King was on edge. He stood out strikingly in contrast with the other horses. His sage-grey body was as sleek and shiny as satin. He had been trained to the hour. He tossed his head as he champed the bit, and every moment his muscles rippled under his fine skin. Proud, mettlesome, and beautiful. Sage King was the favorite in the betting, the Indians, who were ardent gamblers, plunging heavily on him. Bostel saddled the horse and was long at the task. Van stood watching. He was pale and nervous. Bostel saw this.
"Van," he said, "it's your race."
The rider reached a quick hand for bridle and horn, and when his foot touched the stirrup, Sage King was in the air. He came down, springy, quick, graceful, and then he pranced into line with the other horses. Bostel waved his hand. Then the troop of riders and racers headed for the starting point, 2 miles up the valley. Macomber and Blinn, with a rider and a Navajo, were up there as the official starters of the day. Bostel's eyes glistened. He put a friendly hand on Quartz's shoulder, an action which showed the stress of the moment. Most of the men crowded around Bostel. Sears and Hutchinson hung close to Quartz. And Hawley, keeping near his employer, had keen eyes for other things than horses. Suddenly he touched Bostel and pointed down the slope.
"There's Lucy," he said. "She's riding out to join the bunch." "Lucy? Where? I'd forgotten my girl. Where?" "There," repeated Hawley, and he pointed.
Others of the group spoke up, having seen Lucy riding down.
"She's on a red hoss," said one. "'Pears all fired up big to me, her hoss," said another. "Who's got a glass?"
Bostel had the only field glass there, and he was using it. Across the round, magnified field of vision moved a giant red horse, his mane waving like a flame. Lucy rode him. They were moving from a jumble of broken rocks a mile down the slope. She had kept her horse hidden there. Bostel felt an added stir in his pulse beat. Certainly he had never seen a horse like this one. The distance was long, the glass was not perfect. He could not trust his sight. Suddenly that sight dimmed.
"Holly, I can't make out nothing," he complained. "Take the glass. Give me a line on Lucy's mount." "Boss, I don't need the glass to see she's up on a hoss," replied Holly as he took the glass.
He leveled it, adjusted it to his eyes, and then looked long. Bostel grew impatient. Lucy was rapidly overhauling the troop of racers on her way to the post. Nothing ever hurried or excited Holly.
"Wall, can't she see better than me?" queried Bostel eagerly.
"Come on, Hall, give us a tip before she gets to the post," spoke up a rider. Quartz showed intense eagerness, and all the group were excited. Lucy's advent on an unknown horse that even her father could not disparage was the last and unexpected addition to the suspense. They all knew that if the horse was fast, Lucy would be dangerous. Holly at last spoke.
"She's up on a wild stallion. He's red like fire. He's mighty big, strong. Looks as if he didn't want to go near the bunch. Lord, what action! Bostel, I'd say a great hoss."
There was a moment's intense silence in the group round Bostel. Holly was never known to mistake a horse or to be extravagant in judgment or praise.
"A wild stallion," echoed Bostel. "Huh. And she calls him Wildfire. Where'd she get him? Gimme that glass."
But all Bostel could make out was a blur. His eyes were wet. He realized now that his first sight of Lucy on the strange horse had been clear and strong, and it was that which had dimmed his eyes.
"Holly, you use the glass and tell me what comes off," said Bostel as he wiped his eyes on his scarf. He was relieved to find that his sight was clearing. "My God, if I couldn't see this finish!"
Then everybody watched the close, dark mass of horses and riders down the valley, and all waited for Holly to speak.
"They're lining up," began the rider. "Having some muss, too, it 'pears. Bostel, that red hoss is raising hell. He wants to fight. There, he's up in the air. Oh, boys, he's a devil, a hoss killer like all them wild stallions. He's plunging at the king, striking. There, Lucy's got him down, she's handling him. Now they've got the king on the other side, that's better. But Lucy's hoss won't stand. Anyway, it's a running start. Van's got the best position. Foxy Van. He'll be leading before the rest know the race is on. Them Indian mustangs are behaving scandalous. Guess the red stallion scared 'em. Now they're all lined up back at the post. Ah, gunsmoke. They move. It looks like a go."
Then Holly was silent, strained and watching. So were all the watchers silent. Bostel saw far down the valley a moving dark line of horses.
"They're off! They're off!"
called Holly thrillingly. Bostel uttered a deep and booming yell, which rose above the shouts of the men round him, and was heard even in the din of Indian cries. Then, as quickly as the yells had risen, they ceased. Holly stood up on the rock with levelled glass.
"Max dropped the flag. It's a sure go. Now Van's out in front inside. The king's got his stride. Boss, the king's stretching out. Look, see that red horse leap. Bostel, he's running down the king. I knowed it. Oh, he's like lightning. And he's pushing the king over. Off the course. See him plunge. Lord, Lucy can't pull him. She goes up, down, toss, but she sticks like a burr. Oh, good Lucy, hang on. My God, Bostel, the king's thrown. He's down. Comes up off the course. The others flash by. Oh, God, Van's out of the race. And Bostel, and gentlemen, there ain't anything more to this race but a red hoss."
Bostel's heart gave a great leap, and then seemed to stand still. He was half cold, half hot. What a horrible, sickening disappointment. Bostel rolled out a cursing query. Hostel's answer was short and sharp. The king was out. Bostel raved. He could not see, he could not believe. After all the weeks of preparation, of excitement, of suspense, only this! There was no race. The king was out. The thing did not seem possible. 1,000 thoughts flitted through Bostel's mind. Rage, impotent rage possessed him. He cursed Van. He swore he would kill that red stallion. And someone shook him hard. Someone's incisive words cut into his thick, throbbing ears. Luck of the game, luck of the game. The king ain't beat, he's only out. Then the rider's habit of mind asserted itself, and Bostel began to recover. For the king to fall was hard luck, but he had not lost the race. Anguish and pride battled for mastery over him. Even if the king were out of it, it was a Bostel who would win the great race. He ain't beat, muttered Bostel. That ain't fair. He's run off the track by a wild stallion. His dimmed sight grew clear and sharp. And with a gasp, he saw the moving dark line take shape as horses. A bright horse was in the lead. Brighter and larger he grew. Swiftly and more swiftly he came on. The bright color changed to red. Bostel heard Holly calling and Courts calling, and other voices, but he did not distinguish what was said. The line of horses began to bob, to bunch. The race looked close, despite what Holly had said. The Indians were beginning to lean forward, here and there uttering a short, sharp yell. Everything within Bostel grew together in one great throbbing, tingling mass. His rider's eye, keen once more, caught a gleam of gold above the red, and that gold was Lucy's hair. Bostel forgot the king. Then Holly bawled into his ear, "They're halfway!" The race was beautiful. Bostel strained his eyes. He gloried in what he saw. Lucy low over the neck of that red stallion. He could see plainer now. They were coming closer. How swiftly! What a splendid race! But it was too swift. It would not last. The Indians began to yell, drowning the hoarse shouts of the riders. Out of the tail of his eye, Bostel saw Courts and Sears and Hutchinson. They were acting like crazy men. Strange that horse thieves should care. The million thrills within Bostel coalesced into one great shudder of rapture. He grew wet with sweat. His stentorian voice took up the call for Lucy to win. 3/4, bawled Holly into Bostel's ear. Man, Lucy, give that wild hoss free rein. Look, Bostel, you never in your life seen a horse run like that. Bostel never had. His heart swelled. Something shook him. Was that his girl, that tight little grey burr half hidden in the huge stallion's flaming mane? The distance had been close between Lucy and the bunched riders, but it lengthened. How it widened! That flame of a horse was running away from the others, and now they were close, coming into the home stretch. A deafening roar from the onlookers engulfed all other sounds. A straining, stamping, arm-flinging horde surrounded Bostel. Bostel saw Lucy's golden hair whipping out from the flame-streaked mane, and then he could only see that red brute of a horse, Wildfire before the wind. Bostel thought of the leaping prairie flames, storm-driven. On came the red stallion. On! On! What a tremendous stride! What marvelous recovery! What ease! What savage action! He flashed past, low, pointed, long, going faster every magnificent stride. Winner by a dozen lengths.